The sun was a cruel eye in the bleached sky, staring down at the cracked earth that offered no solace. Alara stumbled, her boots scuffing the dust, each step a painful echo of her aloneness. The wagon wheels had left faint tracks hours ago, swallowed by the relentless wind, taking with them the last vestiges of her old life, her family, everything she had ever known. Abandoned. The word echoed in her raw throat, a bitter taste of ash and despair. They'd left her by the broken wagon, a flimsy excuse about needing to fetch help, but the speed of their departure, the averted eyes, had told her the truth. She was a burden shed in the unforgiving expanse of the territory. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through the heat exhaustion. She wasn't just alone. She was lost, insignificant against the vast, indifferent landscape. Her water skin was nearly empty, the sun relentless, and the silence amplified the frantic beat of her own heart. She sank to her knees, dust billowing around her like a shroud. This was it. The end came not with violence, but with the slow, parching breath of the desert. Then, a shadow fell across the dust near her outstretched hand. Not a cloud, the sky was utterly clear, but something solid, obscuring the sun's glare. She flinched, scrambling back despite her weakness, her eyes, swollen and burning, squinting upwards. A man, tall, lean, outlined against the blinding light. He was mounted on a horse that seemed as weary as the land itself, but the man held himself with a quiet, unyielding stillness that was utterly alien to her panic. He wasn't like the men who had left her, all bluster and fear hidden poorly. This one was silent, his face obscured by the brim of his hat and the grime of travel. He didn't speak, didn't offer a hand, just watched her with an intensity that made her breath catch. Was he friend or foe? In this place, the distinction felt perilously thin. Bandits, drifters, men with nothing to lose, her father had warned her. But this man didn't have the look of a predator, not outright. There was something else in his stillness, something watchful, perhaps even weary, like the horse. He dismounted with unhurried movements, the saddle creaking softly. He was dressed in rough, practical clothes, faded and worn, blending into the landscape. He moved with an economy of motion, no wasted energy. He reached into a saddlebag and pulled out a dented canteen. He didn't offer it immediately, just held it for a moment, his gaze still on her. It felt like an eternity, a test. Her thirst was a physical ache, a desperate need that warred with her ingrained caution. Finally, slowly, he extended the canteen towards her. Her hand trembled as she reached for it, her fingers brushing his calloused ones briefly. The metal was warm from the sun. She unscrewed the top and drank, not greedily as her body screamed for, but measured sips, remembering the scarcity. The water was cool, shockingly so, and clean. It was the most precious thing she had ever tasted. When she lowered the canteen, he was still watching her, his expression unreadable. He didn't ask her name, didn't ask what happened, didn't ask why she was alone. The silence stretched again, but it felt different now, less menacing, more observant. He simply remounted his horse, securing the canteen. "Up," was all he said, his voice low and gravelly, blending with the sound of the wind. It wasn't a question, but a quiet command, acknowledging her presence and her plight without dwelling on it. She looked at him, then at the vast, empty horizon and back again. There was nowhere else to go. She climbed onto the back of his horse, accepting his brief, firm hand as he helped her up. It felt strange, sitting behind a stranger, the rhythmic movement of the horse a sudden comfort after her desperate struggle. He didn't speak as they rode, the only sounds the horse's hooves on the dry ground and the persistent wind. She focused on staying upright, her hands gripping the back of his worn saddle, acutely aware of his presence, his solid back inches from her face. She felt a flicker of shame at her dependence, but it was quickly overshadowed by the sheer relief of not having to walk, not having to face the desert alone anymore. He seemed to know the land, navigating by some internal compass she couldn't comprehend, avoiding the worst of the rocky ground, finding faint trails she wouldn't have seen. Hours passed. The sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, a beautiful, cruel irony against the harsh reality of their journey. She started to feel the ache of the ride, her muscles protesting, but she bit back any complaint. He hadn't asked for her story. She wouldn't ask for rest. They didn't speak for a long time. The silence was heavy, but not entirely oppressive. Alara watched the landscape shift, the endless plains giving way to rock formations, mesas rising like silent sentinels against the sky. Her companion, whose name she didn't know, rode with an almost unnerving stillness, his back straight, his gaze fixed ahead. She studied him from her vantage point behind him, the strong line of his jaw beneath the hat brim, the way he handled the reins with quiet competence, the dust that had settled on his shoulders like a second skin. He seemed as much a part of this rugged world as the rocks and the cacti. There was a self-sufficiency about him that both intimidated and reassured her. He clearly knew how to survive out here. That knowledge was, for now, her only hope. As dusk deepened, painting the canyons in long purple shadows, he finally reined in the horse near a small, sheltered alcove in the rocks. There was a thin, almost invisible trickle of water running down one face, a miracle in this arid land. He dismounted fluidly, then turned to help her down, his hand steady at her waist. He didn't linger, immediately setting about the tasks of making camp. He unsaddled the horse, rubbed it down, and led it to the water. Alara watched him, unsure of what to do. Her body screamed for rest, but her mind was a tangled mess of gratitude and caution. He hadn't said a word beyond that initial up. Was she expected to contribute? Did he regret picking her up? He built a small fire, expertly shielding it from the wind with rocks. The flickering flames cast dancing shadows, softening the harsh lines of the canyon walls. He shared the meager contents of his saddlebag, some jerky, hardtack, and roasted beans. It wasn't much, but it was more than she had. They ate in silence, the only sounds the crackling fire and the horse snorting softly nearby. Alara found herself watching his hands as he ate, noticing the strength and capability in them. She risked a glance at his face in the firelight. His eyes were dark and deep-set, reflecting the flames. They held a quiet intensity, but tonight, perhaps, a flicker of something less guarded. When they finished, he carefully banked the fire. "Sleep," he said, gesturing towards the sheltered ground near the fire. His voice was still low, not unkind, but lacking any warmth. It was a practical instruction. Alara nodded, wrapping her thin shawl tighter around her shoulders. She lay down on the hard ground, using her saddlebag as a pillow. Sleep should have been immediate, but it eluded her. She was hyper-aware of him sitting a short distance away, watching the darkness, a rifle resting easily across his lap. He was her protector, yes, but still a stranger, a man of the desert whose motives remained hidden. Yet, huddled near his fire, with his silent vigilance a palpable presence, she felt a fragile sense of safety she hadn't known since being abandoned. In the morning, they rose with the sun. The routine was established without a single word being exchanged. He tended to the horse and the fire, while Alara, tentatively, gathered more dry brush. He didn't object, simply nodded once in acknowledgement. This small shared task, this unspoken understanding, felt like a significant step. He shared his food again, and they ate facing the sunrise, two solitary figures against the vast canvas of the desert. It was on that morning, seeing his profile silhouetted against the dawn, that she felt a flicker of something beyond fear and gratitude, a nascent curiosity about the man who had saved her. He seemed utterly self-contained, needing no one, yet he had stopped for her. Why? The question lingered in her mind, unanswered. They continued their journey, the days blurring into a rhythm of riding, resting, and surviving. He taught her without words, where to find scarce water signs, which plants to avoid, how to read the sky for approaching storms. Alara, in turn, learned to anticipate his needs, fetching water for the horse, watching their back trail. She wasn't helpless anymore. The desert demanded resilience, and slowly, it was chipping away at her vulnerability, revealing a core of strength she hadn't known she possessed. She still didn't know his name, and she hadn't offered hers. Names felt too personal, too much like making a claim on a connection that was still fragile, born of necessity, not choice. One afternoon, they stopped near a rock formation that offered unusual shade. While he scouted the area, Alara cleaned their few utensils with sand and what little water could be spared. As she worked, she heard voices, rough and loud, drifting on the wind. She froze, her heart leaping into her throat. Two men, on horseback, appeared over a rise, their faces hard, their eyes scanning the landscape with a predatory air. They weren't looking for help. They were looking for opportunity. They spotted the horse tied nearby, then Alara. A cruel smile spread across the face of the larger man. "Well now, looky here, Jeb," he drawled, his voice thick with malice. "Lost little bird, ain't she?" Panic seized Alara, but before she could cry out or flee, her companion was there, seemingly appearing out of the rocks. He didn't speak, didn't make a sudden move. He simply stood between her and the newcomers, his rifle now held loosely but purposefully at his side. The two men stopped, their smiles faltering slightly at the sight of him. He radiated a quiet authority, a competence that was instantly recognized by those who lived by their wits and muscle. "She's with me," he said, his voice still low, but carrying a chilling undertone of warning. The larger man hesitated, his gaze flicking from Alara to the rifle, then back to the man's face, trying to gauge him. "Didn't see you with her, Jeb," the other man muttered, already looking nervous. "Figured she was alone." "You figured wrong," her protector replied evenly. The tension was a tangible thing, thick and suffocating. Alara stood frozen behind him, her eyes fixed on his back, trusting him utterly in that moment. The man stared at her companion for a long moment, weighing the potential trouble against the perceived prize. The quiet confidence emanating from the silent man, the readiness in his posture, the way he held the weapon, it all spoke of someone who knew how to use it and wasn't afraid to. Slowly, grudgingly, the larger man gave a short, sharp nod. "Right then," he said, though his eyes were still calculating. "Our mistake," he reined his horse around. "Let's ride, Jeb." As they rode away, disappearing back over the rise, Alara let out a shaky breath. She looked at the man who had protected her. He lowered the rifle slightly, but his gaze remained fixed on the direction the men had gone until they were out of sight. Only then did he turn to her. For the first time, she saw a flicker of something in his eyes that wasn't just watchfulness or weariness. It was a hard protectiveness, earned in the crucible of this land. "Thank you," she whispered, the words feeling inadequate. He simply nodded, his expression softening almost imperceptibly. In the face of shared danger, the wall between them had thinned. "Stay close," he said, the closest thing to reassurance he had offered. That night, the bond between them felt irrevocably changed. The encounter with the dangerous drifters had underscored their mutual reliance. He had defended her without question, his actions speaking volumes where words failed. Alara, watching him tend the fire, no longer saw just a mysterious protector, but a man of quiet strength and perhaps a hidden depth. She still didn't know his name, but she knew his character, or at least the part of it forged in this brutal environment. He was steady, capable, and beneath the stoic exterior, he had chosen to defend her, a stranger. They continued their journey, the days still long and hard, but the crushing weight of despair had lifted for Alara. She walked with a purpose now, contributing where she could, her eyes scanning the horizon not just for danger, but for signs of their path forward. She learned his habits, the slight tilt of his head when he listened to the wind, the way his eyes narrowed when he spotted something in the distance. She noticed the quiet care he took with his horse, and the surprising gentleness with which he handled small, injured creatures they sometimes encountered. These small observations painted a picture of a man far more complex than the silent figure who had appeared in her hour of need. One evening, camped under a sky thick with stars that seemed impossibly bright and close in the desert air, She finally broke the long-held silence. "My name is Alara," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. He turned his head, his gaze meeting hers across the small fire. The firelight illuminated his face fully for the first time, revealing lines etched by sun and time, and eyes that held a deep, quiet knowing. He studied her for a moment, a hint of something unreadable in his expression. Then, just as softly, he replied, "Kane, just Kane. No last name, no explanation." But it was a name, a piece of who he was, offered to her. Felt like a gift. The journey pressed on. The desert remained a formidable adversary, but they faced it together. A flash flood trapped them in a canyon for a day and a night, forcing them to huddle together for warmth and safety against the rushing water. During the long hours of waiting, huddled side by side, the necessity of their shared space broke down the last barriers of formality. They spoke sparingly at first, then more openly. Kane shared snippets of his life, a solitary existence, moving from place to place, skilled in tracking and survival. He didn't speak of family or where he came from, and Alara didn't press. Alara told him about her life before, the farm, the sudden loss of her parents, the relatives who had seen her as a burden after the inheritance was gone, culminating in their cruel abandonment. Sharing the vulnerability of their pasts, the wounds they carried, forged a connection deeper than mere survival. When the water receded and they could continue, the dynamic between them had shifted again. There was a quiet tenderness underlying their interactions now, a shared history written in the dust and sun. They found a small, isolated ranch, deserted but intact, with a well that still held water and a sturdy cabin. It was a haven in the wilderness. They decided to stay for a time at least, to rest, to rebuild their strength. Working side by side to make the cabin habitable, repairing fences, tending a small patch of ground they hoped to plant, their partnership solidified. The silent man and the lost girl, bound together by the harsh land and their own resilience. One evening, sitting on the porch as the sun set, Kane reached out and took Alara's hand. His touch was rough, calloused, but gentle. He didn't speak, just held her hand, his thumb stroking the back of her hand lightly. Alara looked at him, her heart full. The fear and despair that had defined her arrival in the desert felt impossibly distant. She had been broken, lost, and this silent stranger had not only saved her life, but had shown her a strength she didn't know she possessed. He had offered quiet protection, shared hardship, and earned her trust, piece by agonizing piece. And in doing so, he had helped her find herself again. The desert remained vast and challenging, but it no longer felt like an enemy. It was the crucible that had forged their improbable connection. They were two solitary souls who had found an unexpected harbor in each other, a quiet promise of companionship in a lonely world. Alara, no longer the lost girl, but a woman tested and tempered by the sun and wind, looked at Kane, the stoic protector who had become her partner. They had built something fragile but real from the ruins of their separate lives, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the unexpected places where love and belonging could take root. Their future was uncertain, stretching out like the endless plains before them, but they would face it together, two against the wild, no longer alone.